Good day. We are Group 2 and we will be discussing Modules 5 to 7 from Unit 1 of the book Philosophical Analysis by Acuña, Andresito. These topics included in the module are ambiguous and vague terms, on definition, and analytic definition.
Ambiguous terms. So, what is ambiguity in the first place? It is a matter of degree. The more uses a term acquires, the more ambiguous it becomes. It is too ambiguous when a term has acquired too many uses that it becomes difficult to determine the proper language game in which the term is used. So, for example, the word good, it is a central concept in moral philosophy. But it has different meanings for the following groups. For hedonists, good is used to refer to bodily pleasure. Any action that promotes pleasure is good. For humanists, the word good will refer to the development of all human potentials. If an action hastens the development of your intellectual potential, then that action is good. For utilitarians, any action that promotes the greatest happiness for the greatest number is good. For logical positivists, you use the term good to express your act of approval. For Kantians, an action is good if it is done in accordance with their duty. And in ordinary context, almost everything can be described as good. So, ambiguity is like a word or phrase or sentence that has multiple meanings and is unclear. So in general, if it is hard to understand, you can say that it is an ambiguous term.
For a vague term, in contrast to ambiguous terms, we mentioned that if the term has too many uses, the meaning of it becomes ambiguous. For vague terms, it refers to the lack of clarity on the intention of the term. In other words, there is something wrong with the intention of the concept, as said in the book. When a term becomes vague, a question pops up when faced with the vague term. This question asks, what to include and what to exclude? There are quite a few vague terms that we may be using in our everyday lives. Those include the use of some, few, many, and almost. When these terms are used, let's say an example is, there are still some rotten donuts left. As stated in the module, the term some refers to at least one, but not all, in symbolic logic. Coming back to the example, it would lead to questions of, how much is some? How much is rotten? At least one, but not all. That's the lack of clarity. If a term is unable to bring the antidote to this uncertainty, which is clarity, that will bring the term to make it usable as it is given the right intention with clarity, that term will become too vague. With that said, vagueness is also a matter of degree, meaning that there can be multiple levels of uncertainty or vagueness in a term. There are still many pencils left in the box. The degree of these terms is still light. Nonetheless, still makes you think, how much is still in there? The vagueness is still present. Another example, as said in the module, other vague examples, like art and pornography, have a certain degree of vagueness. Where does the line lie where pornography becomes something obscene or becomes art? Is it when pornography is painted by a well-known artist? That's only when it becomes art? Just to wrap up, both ambiguity and vagueness can confuse. An event called linguistic confusion takes place when two or more speakers encounter misunderstandings due to either not being aware of using terms in other ways or having an unclear intention of the term used. As said in the module, the best way to avoid this misunderstanding is to never take part in verbal dispute unless the disputants are using the same words in the same way. To separate the two, The ambiguity of a term refers to it having multiple uses throughout its history, and each of these uses has mutually exclusive intentions. Meanwhile, vagueness refers to having a loose or unclear intention that the topic referring to becomes undefinable.
Let's now move on to the fallacy of equivocation. It occurs when the danger of confusion is present. It may happen once a term is used in one way and then used again for the same line of reasoning. When using a term in an ambiguous manner, it creates confusion among the readers or the listeners. Therefore, once confusion is present, the text may be misleading. For Acuña's example, consciousness is a being such that in its being is in question insofar as this being implies a being other than itself, by Jean-Paul Sartre. And for another example, Carnap's famous quotation from Heidegger. Why are we concerned about this nothing? The nothing is rejected by science and sacrificed as the unreal. Science wants us to have nothing to do with the nothing. What is the nothing? Does the nothing exist only because the not negation exists? Or do the negation and the not exist only because the nothing exists? So from these examples, we can see that a single word, the word being and the word nothing, were used in the same text multiple times but has a different meaning or purpose every single time it was mentioned. So we maintain that the nothing is more primitive than the not and negation. We know the nothing. The nothing is a simple negation of the totality of being. Anxiety reveals the nothing. The nothing itself nots. And what's important is that the only antidote to either an ambiguous or vague concept is to define them. Definition will avoid linguistic confusion, not only in your writing but also in your thinking as well.
To define a synonym, it means finding a familiar word to a term, defining an unfamiliar term with a familiar one, then using it to compose a good definition. But there is an event called circular definitions, which refers to using the same term or by its synonym to define the term, when there are other less rudimentary ways to define it. This is the most common way someone defines a term, as it is difficult to determine a term without using a synonym. For ostensive definition, using examples to describe the term as defining it is called ostensive definition. This method is also helpful in reaching for the meaning of a term, as it gives a comparison to use. This way of defining is the most used way of conveying the use of a term using a method called pointing gesture. That's when it is used to point out other members of its extension. An example would be telling someone who doesn't know what amphibians are, as telling them that they are animals like frogs. Although this may be a helpful method to define, it gives an incomplete meaning to them. The knowledge received will only be limited to the examples given, rather than being able to determine more of what's within the category, or rather called to generalize. You're only limited to what was given by the ostensive definition.
Now let's proceed to intention and extension. Intention is a trait or characteristic shared by the members. It is important to have complete understanding and control of the use of a term to be able to state it in a concise manner and avoid vagueness. On the other hand, extension is the members of the domain of the concept. This facilitates the learning of the concept through the psychological process of discrimination and generalization. Intention indicates the internal content of a term or concept that constitutes its formal definition. It is the sense. So, extension, on the other hand, indicates its range of applicability by naming the particular object that it denotes. So, to understand it better, here are two examples. The term ship, its intension, a vehicle for conveyance on water. Extension, battleships, cargo ships, passenger ships. Example 2. Bird. Intention, an animal with a beak, feathers, and wings. Extension, owls, hummingbirds, and eagles. So in short, intention is like more of a dictionary meaning of the word, and extension gives the examples. So, what is a reportive definition? It is providing information about how a term is being used in the same way in numerous language games. It reports about standard use or conventional use of the term. It is often identified with dictionary definitions and synonymous with lexical definition. Reportive definitions are useful for learning new words in a language. This means that the definition should not be inconsistent with the existing usage of the term in question. Suppose someone consults a very old dictionary that defines a computer as a person whose job is to carry out mathematical calculations. This definition was before modern electronic computers were invented. It is inconsistent with how we actually use the word computer today, and so it becomes and is no longer a good reportive definition. Because a reportive definition should report the existing meaning of a term. It gives an explanation of the general meaning a word carries for a group of language users. So here are some reportive definitions. Prime numbers are any integers that are whole numbers greater than 1 and divisible by 1 itself. WHO stands for World Health Organization. And lastly, sushi is a kind of food made with rice vinegar with some meat or vegetable topping. We can say that these are reportive definitions since it is how we use the terms in the current world.
Next is the stipulative definition. Stipulative definition ought to use words in a very different manner in a language game. The stipulative definition will depart from the conventional use. Consequently, the ones who want to play the language game must follow the proposed use/definition. As indicated by Wittgenstein, we can circumscribe the use of a term for specialized purposes such as scientific research, legislation, coining a term in philosophy, or perhaps naming an invention. When a term is used in a completely different way, a new definition for that word will come out. When introducing a unique term, the creator must provide a specific definition. Once confusion arises, the only person to blame is the creator. So, when we use a new word or introduce a new term, the creator must provide a definition so that the readers won't be confused about the purpose of the word that was stated. The main style for specifying technical terms is the use of stipulative definition. In philosophy, we use several terms which were established through stipulative definition. A few examples are simple object, ideas, sense data, a priori, mind, corporeal, substance, and the absolute. These metaphysical terms can't be recognized by an appeal to reportive definition. The readers must engage in understanding the context of the language to specify the technical use of terms. Terms used scientifically are often introduced with a stipulative definition. The usual case is when there is a discovery of a new species or phenomenon and the term is promptly coined through the stipulative definition. There are instances when terms introduced by stipulative definition in the sciences are adopted by certain language games, and as a result, gain an ordinary use. As an example, the terms normal, introvert, extrovert, neurotic, psychotic, DNA, RNA, atom, molecules, and etc. have gained wide usage. Even in philosophy, terms such as atom and molecule from physics were derived by Ricin in his philosophy of logical atomism to differentiate the types of propositions, namely atomic and molecular propositions. Dispositional concepts in the science like magnetic, soluble, temperature, electric charge, elastic conductor of heat or electricity, and intelligence. These concepts don't directly present observable characteristics of their intention, but to observe their intentions, specific steps must be done. This is where context clues and proper sentence construction comes into play. The author must use these hints or these definitions in order to provide a meaning for the purpose of the word that was newly introduced to the readers. Now, for operational definition, Percy Williams Bridgman invented the technique known as operational definition. He advocated that all scientific concepts must be defined as performable operations. This is the technique of anchoring theoretical terms and dispositional terms on the plane of observation. Number 1. Instrumental operations performed by various devices for observation and measurement like microscope or telescope. Number 2. Paper and pencil operations, verbal operations, and thought experiments. For example, an object is magnetic if and only if you perform the following operation. If you put iron fillings near the object and you observe that the iron fillings cling or attach to the object. Next is sugar is soluble in water if and only if you actually perform the following operations. If you put sugar in the water and you observe the sugar dissolves. An example of paper and pencil operation that we are familiar with is the operational definition of the term intelligence quotient or IQ. The formula used is IQ equals MA over CA times 100. MA is the mental age and at the same time the test was taken, and the CA is the chronological age. If your score is above 140, then we could say that you are a genius. If your score is between 90 to 110, then you are considered average. The operation needed to be performed to define concepts is inside the intention of the concept. It is necessary and sufficient for the membership in the extension of the concept. The intention is not hindered just because certain conditions are only plausible by doing some operations, and on the other hand, the intention here becomes a strict intention.
So, what is analytical definition? It is the technique or method of describing concepts in a practical way. It focuses on the statement of intention, the traits, characteristics, functions shared by all the members of the concept, without any vagueness offered by extension. It has three main components: the definiendum, definiens, and denotata. So first, the definiendum. It is the subject of definition, the word itself or the concept. Second, definiens. The meaning of the definiendum. It is also the intention. So it has two components, the genus and the differentia. Genus is the classification, category, or species. Differentia, on the other hand, distinguishes the use, function, attributions, or set of traits from the other members in the genus. And the last part of analytical definition is denotata. The actual existing or non-existing concept, object. Denotata provides an example. So, here is an example for analytical definition. A bird is an animal with feathers, like ostrich, chicken, and pelican. In this sentence, the definiendum is bird. It is the main concept, or the subject of the sentence. For the genus, it is animal, because it is the wider concept. Differentia, with feathers, since without feathers, they cannot be part of the concept of birds. And denotata is the ostrich, chicken, and pelican. These are the given examples.
Now, for common errors in definition. There are things that may cause confusion when creating a definition. There are several things to take into consideration for you to perform your obligation as when criticizing a definition as a critical thinker. You would consider the most common mistakes and how to avoid them. If you are a reader, you should always be a critical thinker. You should always think or look for the meaning behind the terms. We have the definiendum, definiens, and denotata. So, for this example, we are going to use a bird. A bird is an animal that flies, and under this differentia, we can consider dove, eagles, bats, and etc. For the next genus, a bird is an animal that lays eggs. Under this differentia, we can use swallow, owls, platypus, and etc. A bird is an animal that sings or talks. In this differentia, we can use the canary, the mina, and the parrot. The differentia that flies has bats, which are actually mammals. It also includes butterflies and moth. Once the definition is too vague, the possibility of including non-members of the concept is more likely to happen. The differentia that lays eggs has platypus, turtles, and crocodiles. The definition is still considered too broad, and non-members will still be technically considered as parts of the concept. The differentia that flies and that lays eggs is not fully exclusive to birds. On the other hand, the differentia that sings or talks is way too specific and may actually exclude some members of the concept. These are the usual errors that you are liable to make in creating an analytic definition. The term differentia is crucial in producing an analytic definition. Being too broad or being too narrow in creating a definition are probably the most common errors in composing a definition. So when you provide a differentia, it must be specific enough but not too specific to a point where actual members of the concept are excluded from it. And you cannot be too broad or give too wide of a differentia, because non-members of the concept will be considered as a part of your differentia.
Here are the rules to remember when composing a good analytic definition. 1. Remember to include essential traits of the term that are necessary and sufficient in the definition. Using family resemblance of traits are good to use. Remember to not use too broad, that it includes non-members, or that it's too narrow to exclude the genuine members. Number 2. Avoid using circular definition. It only gives an approximation of a definition. Number 3. Avoid stating definitions in the negative. State it in the affirmative. Definitions must state what it is, not what it is not. Number 4. Avoid using figurative, obscure, and metaphorical language. It may seem poetic and profound, but ultimately ends up as uninformative. Avoid using definition by synonym or ostensive definition. Both give an incomplete definition and may be misleading.